Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to the Corbett Report. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, in a conversation being recorded in February of 2025. And this is just one of those little ironies of the universe. I did not plan this, but it turns out this is going to be interview number 1929. That's right. Interview 1929 is with good old friend and returning guest John Titus of the BestEvidence blog. I know you know his work by now. If not, it will, of course, be linked up in the show notes, along with his brand new series, which you will understand how apropos 1929 might be when we talk about The War for Bankocracy, a new multi-part exploration of the U.S. Federal Reserve's latest attempts to free itself from its constitutional constraints. It is available at Solari.com, and we're going to get into a lot of detail. If you haven't seen the first episode of this new series yet, please stop this conversation and go watch it. I think it'll be worth your time. But anyway, we will be getting into the nitty-gritty details here, so let's bring him on to the show. John Titus, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, James. So excellent that I'm on interview 1929.
I swear I didn't plan it this way, but anyway, here we are. Well, all right. So why is that important? What are we talking about today? We're talking about The War for Bankocracy. As I say, a new multi-part series coming out through Solari.com, which even in and of itself, the way that you are releasing this is actually an interesting thing that we should probably discuss. But before we get into that, just lay the groundwork for us. What is The War for Bankocracy? What are you talking about? And why are you talking about it now?
The War for Bankocracy is a multi-century effort by bankers for control. And eventually, and they've been getting more and more control for over 300 years, and they're getting close to sealing the deal. Let me back up a step. If you look at Western society, you could really, despite all the pretenses about democracy and constitutionalism and the rule of law and whatever else, it's there in large degree. But there's a little wrinkle in that our monetary system divides into two types of people. There's a biggest part is us. That's everybody. We have to borrow our money into existence. And then there's a small little sliver of 0.1% or probably really 0.05% of people who can create money out of thin air and lend it out to everybody else at interest. And what that does is that creates an uneven playing field in the system, throughout the whole system. And so there's been a war for more and more and more control over the system. And the war is waged, as you know, central banks are at the top and then retail banks are beneath them. It's really central banks that are calling the shots, but central banking really isn't that well understood. And so what I wanted to do is to lay it out. What's going on, what's gone on over the last 300 plus years, and then how the law plays into it, because the law of money is an important and often overlooked, it's very frequently overlooked part of money. Just the fact that you're creating, when banks create money out of thin air, it's not technically money. It's really debt. It's an IOU. That's why you need FDIC insurance at your bank, because you have a $100 bill in your hand. You own that $100 bill until you deposit it in your bank. When you deposit it in the bank, you don't own it anymore. You're now an unsecured creditor. That's a legal transaction. And that part isn't really understood. And it's especially not understood at the wholesale central bank level. And so this series is designed to educate, to bring up to speed people who are informed, people who are educated, people who know maybe they have some questions about what's going on. The series will sort of lay it out and where we are now and the indications we have now that we're about to undergo some changes.
That's right. Well, the residents of Cyprus might have had a crash course on the workings of the banks and how you don't own the money in your banks. The banks own them about 13 years ago, which hopefully my audience knows because I covered it at the time, the bail-ins that occurred there and the subsequent laying of the institutional framework on the international level for subsequent bail-ins. of such magnitude to take place. Anyway, there is an entire legal framework around all of this that most people are completely unaware of. Hopefully, my audience excluded, because of the aforementioned reports on Cyprus, as well as, may I humbly suggest, my documentary on the Federal Reserve, Century of Enslavement, the history of the Federal Reserve, because I understand palpably, having studied this history, the history of the United States and the wars that have gone on, civil wars and others, can be absolutely tied to this question of who controls the money. And that has been the key theme for a long time. And the Federal Reserve seems to have been an attempt of the banking oligarchy to stake their claim in the heart of the American empire, as it were. And as you say, things are progressing because of a new memo that has been released that strikes an interesting note on a very specific term that sounds so innocuous. Central bank independence. We've heard this before. The Fed thinks it's independent of the U.S. government. That's what the term central bank independence means, right, John?
Right. The theory of central bank independence, the propaganda campaign of central bank independence is you leave us, if you, the government, you, the people, leave us, the bankers, the experts alone, you'll achieve better economic results. And there's a few problems with that I'm going to just really go into the series. The third episode will really get into the problem. There's the pitch on the facts. Let's start with Federal Reserve independence, because the Fed always makes this claim. You need to leave us alone. We're the policy experts. If politicians get involved in monetary policy, you're going to get wild inflation. You're going to get all these bad results. And what I'm showing in these series is no. When Congress gets involved, like it did in the wake of the global financial crisis, you get good results because it was Congress and it was really the anger of the American people that reined the Fed in. They put a leash on the Fed and they couldn't spend all the bailout money they wanted to. That is in direct contrast with what happened during the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic? Everybody's like, oh my God, there's a virus, and nobody's asking questions of what the Fed's doing. What does the Fed do? It buys $5 trillion of assets from non-banks, and it creates inflation. That's where that came from. And it came because Congress sat on its hands and didn't ask any questions and didn't put any pressure on. They're like, do whatever you got to do to stop that virus. And we have a disaster on our hands as a result of that. So that whole notion of Federal Reserve independence is nonsense. What it really is, it's a pitch to do away with transparency. They're saying, don't ask any questions. Don't ask for any documents. Don't look through the window here. You let us do what we want to do in secret with our crony friends and buying all their assets, and you leave us alone. That's what it's really all about. And I make the case for that pretty strongly in this series in at least 2 different episodes.
All right. I think we've laid the groundwork pretty well here. So let's talk about the series itself. As I say, it's called The War for Bankocracy, and it is up. The first episode is now up on Solari.com if you're watching this interview as it is being posted. So I hope people have checked it out, let alone will check it out, and will go over the transcript and the footnotes and the documents and the clips and everything else that is there. Tell us about the way this series is being released.
Yeah. Well, from personal experience, from bitter personal experience, I'm sure that when you put content out that is in any way controversial, you're at risk of having that content yanked out from under you and basically vanished into the night. And so when I was doing this series, I'm like, that's a real risk. I don't want to write and produce 8 entire episodes with all this stuff and just have YouTube, Odyssey, BitChute, Substack, whoever. I don't trust any of these people. So I had done, I've been doing a show on money and markets, Solari.com with Catherine Austin Fitz for a number of years. And I pitched it to her. I said, hey, could you be like the guarantor of this series and just have, so it's backed up? Because I just don't want it to vanish. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, what you really need to do here, I really want to make available to other creators because there's a lot of research I did in this. I read a lot of congressional transcripts. I've tracked down hearings that I didn't even know exist, for which there are no transcripts. I've tracked down hearings. So there's an immense amount of research that's valuable, and it could be valuable to people who follow in the footsteps of James Corbett or John Titus. And they say, you know what? Those guys they were okay, but I could do better. You know what? You have at it. Go freely. I want you to freely download everything I've got. I've got transcripts of these things. I've got videos. And so, for example, I've got video clips that are really good. And they're valuable. They're 1080p clips. They're full HD of congressional hearings, congressional testimony that maybe you haven't seen before. Just go ahead and download them and use them yourself. So the idea is that it's sort of a foundation for other people to build on later. And that was so it's two things. It was protect my work, number one, and number two, it's sort of passing the torch to other creators and just other researchers who might want to use some of the materials.
Yeah. Excellent idea. Like an open source exploration. And here's all my sources and have at it. Exactly the ethos that the Corbett Report was founded on. The only difference is I don't actually make the clips themselves downloadable from my website, but I do put up my transcripts and everything else besides. So anyway.
Yeah, you're excellent about the transcripts. That I know. Yeah.
Well, I trust me, I can appreciate how much work goes into even just getting the transcript prepped for posting, let alone, actually writing and researching it, let alone recording and editing all of it. It's a mind-boggling amount of work. Anyway, people don't need to hear that sub story. It is now spilling forth from Solari.com. So episode 1 has already aired. Let's just assume people have already seen that and they've wetted their toes in the lake of information that's about to be tsunamied upon them. What a weird metaphor. Anyway, let's get into episode 2. What are you going to be talking about next time?
Episode 2 really is the history of apex sovereign power. Let me talk about that for a minute. Why? Who's top dog in the U.S.? Who's top dog in the world when you're talking about governmental powers? And I make the case that for a long time, for a long eons of world history, it was really the military that had the power. If you had the guns and you had the steel, you ruled the roost. And that changed along the way. That changed. And by the founding of the U.S., let's say the late 1700s, early 1800s, it was no longer that. The banks were in control. Banking establishments were firmly in control throughout the West. And the key event along the way was the founding of the Bank of England. And so episode 2 gets into why is the Bank of England getting founded in 1694? Why is that such a game changer, such an epic event? And I break that down and sort of show there's 2 key factors in the Bank of England, which was founded, by the way, by William Patterson. The guy was a pirate, that's just like too perfect. But basically, the Bank of England really brought about debt-based money on the national level, not on a wholesale level and on a national level. The Bank of England kicked off debt-based money. Then once you do that, once you're borrowing your money into existence, man, you've given the bankers a ton of control. Because now, if you need a loan to create new money, which you pretty much do in our system, and you've pretty much needed to do for 300 years, all the banks got to do to shrink the money supply is call in the loans. And if I'm sure your subscribers and your viewers know, anybody who's ever taken out a loan, there's a clause in that loan contract that says whenever the bank wants, they can call in that loan, and you got to cough up on the spot. So they can contract the money supply instantly. In fact, you let off this interview number 1929. That's what happened in 1929. The bankers call in the loans. They shrink the money supply. The money supply shrinks from about 30% in 4 years, from 1929 to 1933. That's the Depression, right? You think about its falling stocks. It's contracting money supply. It's the debt-based monetary system. And that's what really got underway in 1694 in earnest, big time.
Let me just footnote that for people who don't know that story, because even Ben Bernanke admitted exactly what you just said. The Fed caused the Great Depression, but we won't do it again. Ha ha ha. And that is an
Yeah.
on the record comment that he made about 20 years ago. So I will dig up that reference if I can and put it in the show notes for people who don't know that bit of occluded history. But I am so glad that you're going to be tackling the foundation of the Bank of England, because that was almost kind of a footnote in my Century of Enslavement. I did talk about it briefly, but not in the detail it needs to be put in, because as you say, people have probably heard the phrase "all wars are bankers' wars" before, but
Right.
that is literally the instantiation of the Bank of England, where the king is trying to wage his war against France, doesn't have the money to do it, so okay, let's create this Bank of England idea, and suddenly you get literal pirates creating the coin of the realm. You can't make this stuff up, but this is the type of history that for some reason they don't teach us in school. Why is that?
For some reason.
Crazy.
They don't talk about it.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
So actually, I got to tell you, there's a second Corbett contribution to the series. The big one is, I think I'd email you about this. You did an episode on like solutions and research and where to go to get research. And one of the ones you put out there was Anna's Archive. I'm like, I've never heard of that. So I start looking around and poking around for books about Bank of England. And I find one. I find a biography of a big head of the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of England in the 1930s. And I downloaded it and read it. And it was just like, I couldn't believe what I'm reading. I'm like, I could build a whole episode on this. I am, because it's astonishing what you find in these hidden resources.
Absolutely.
That book.
And I'm so gratified to hear that, because truly this entire conversation and your entire series is the culmination of the idea that I've had for open source exploration for so long, that putting sources out there, information is now more freely available than it has ever been in the entirety of human history. We have access to millions of books and documents and things right at our fingertips. All it takes is someone with a little ounce of curiosity and a little bit of stick-to-itiveness to put together a series that explains what is happening, where we're going, why we don't want to be going in that direction, and get that information out to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Excellent. This is the revolution that they are trying so desperately to cork that bottle of information propagation that has been uncorked in recent decades. So my hat's off to you for doing this.
They want to cork on that, and they want to cork on your freedom with your money.
This is it. And I think the two are related in various ways, and it's probably the same characters who are behind both corkings.
Don't you know it? They're totally related. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay. So we've gone over, obviously, the first episode is in the can. People can watch it right now. The second episode will be coming out, as I understand it, in about a week from now. And every subsequent episode will be coming out in every other week until episode 4 is in the can. And then you're going to have a short break and then the rest of the series. Tell us about the big scope of the series. Where are we going from here?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. So episodes 1 through the next one will be out February 18th. And then add 2 weeks for number 3 and add 2 more weeks for number 4. Episodes 1 through 4 are really the Fed and really the U.S. And then there's a break. And then we go into overseas into England. And we go into some history for episodes 5 through 7. And then 8 comes back to the U.S. and says, where are we now? What do we need to do? And then that'll wrap it up. I think if things go according to schedule, it'll all be said and done right around Memorial Day, but we'll see. I mean, it's a ton of work, but that gives you the scope of that's the game plan. 1 through 4, U.S. Fed, 5 through 7, Europe, England history, and then 8 back in the U.S. Sort of really, what do we need to do in the West? How do we stop these maniacs? What do we need to do to push back against the criminals running the system?
Well, you've just answered my ultimate question here, which is, does this series address the question of what do we do with this information? Because it's great to know about history and how things are happening and what they're doing, but what do we do about it? Is there going to be a solutions-oriented focus towards the end?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go back in history, Someone once asked Ben Franklin, like, hey, what form of government did you come out of there with the Constitutional Convention? And he said it's a democracy or a republic, whatever he said. The point is, he said, if you can keep it, meaning the people have to participate in their own government. And that's the main thing is the U.S. and really Western governments generally are at their best when the people are engaged and involved and frankly, kind of angry. If you look at healthy societies are ones where our public leaders have some modicum, they have some measure of fear of the people. It might be fear of losing status. It might be fear of being embarrassed. It might be fear of being voted out of office, fear of exposure, whatever it is. But they're fearful of the people. Unhealthy societies are ones where the people are afraid of their government. And my concern is we're sort of lurching into the latter category where people are, all the scare stories that come out of this happened to him, someone raised his voice, he got retaliated against. That's sort of where we're going. And what we need to do is push back. You remember in 2008 when the powers that be floated a notion in September of 2008, floated a notion of bailing out the banks. The backlash against that was like nothing that anybody had ever seen. It was like a pestilent boil, just exploded all over the place. People were furious. I've read testimony doing this series. One congressman says, I've never got more phone calls against anything. He says, I've been in Congress 25 years. He says, I got 20,000. No, he said 25,000. 25,000 phone calls against that bailout. He says, I got 200 for it. That is what gets Congress to act, is phone calls and pressure. The other big thing is you really want to exert pressure on your government through Freedom of Information Act requests. I mean, we've got transparency and we've got means for obtaining transparency and obtaining information. We got to use them. We got to use those methods to get the people to divulge the information. I mean, here we are. Look, it's 60 years plus 62, almost 62 years since Kennedy was assassinated. Do we know anything more now than we did 60 plus years? No. You got to put the pressure on.
Oh, don't worry. From what I understand, Trump is going to reveal everything. You know what? It's so incredibly important what you say there, and I hope people take it to heart because I think there is an incredibly fascinating history of the past 15 years that can and should, and maybe I'll write it myself, but should be written on the cultural history of the past 15 years and the woke culture, identity, culture war nonsense that has absolutely subsumed every other political story is a result of that 2008 backlash that you're talking about, which gave rise to two populist movements, one on the right, the Tea Party, one on the left, the Occupy movement. And both of those completely subsumed into this culture war nonsense that has totally diverted it from the fact that, hey, it seems that people on the left and the right totally agree on this against the bankers and against Wall Street. Wow. Now that's all gone. It's all been shoved under the rug and no one even remembers the 2008 bailout.
I remember because I was making a movie. I was making a movie called Bailout. At that time, I went to a lot of those Occupy Wall Street protests. They didn't look anything like what the media said they did. I was at these protests. There was a lot of people who were older and a lot of people were having conversations exactly like you just said, like, hey, you know what? I may be lefty, but the Ron Paul people are making sense. And the Ron Paul people are like, hey, those guys make sense. And they were getting together and the powers that be had to put that to a stop as soon as they could. They got together and they did it. It was a concerted campaign. I tell you where they found a winner, though. The powers that be later on found a winner was during that damn pandemic with fear. They got the fear back off of them and onto us. People like, oh my God, the virus. The piles of bodies are stacking up outside my window right now. I got to wear. That was a sad episode. I hope you write that book or make that video or whatever you do. That's a fantastic idea.
Well, somebody's got to do it. So anyway, if someone beats me to the punch, I'll happily promote it. Anyway, I keep going back to that moment in the original Ron Paul run for presidency where you had 20,000 people at the rallies chanting in unison, "End the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed." That is a truly subversive revolutionary moment. And I think people who know history and know what I was talking about earlier about the history of at least the American political scene as a fight between the bankers and who want to control the money versus the people, if you put it in that context, that is the type of revolutionary moment that the bankers never want to see repeated. Don't talk about the Fed. Who cares about that? Look, it's all about DEI and trans bathrooms. Don't talk anything about the monetary supply. That's not important. Trivial little details. We are going to talk about it. We are going to put this back in the face of the people and rub their face in it. This is why your life is not going according to your plan. This is what is being done to you. They are laughing in your face, distracting you with nonsense. Get back to reality. Get your head in the game. This is important stuff. And John, my hat's off to you for putting this back in the public realm. This is such important information. I know my audience is going to be interested in it. Let's direct them once again to how they can start watching The War for Bankocracy.
There's a website, there's a URL. It's at Solari. It's Solari.com, War for Bankocracy. I think if you just go to Solari.com website and search my name in the search bar or War for Bankocracy in the search bar, you'll get it. But the other way to get to my stuff is everything I kind of do, I do under a label Best Evidence. So I have a YouTube channel called Best Evidence, an Odyssey and a BitChute channel called Best Evidence, and a Substack called Best Evidence. I really started that Substack late in my video game. I've been making videos for 10 years. But because of YouTube shenanigans, I was like, I should really have sort of a go-to home base and stop wasting. I'm working for free for YouTube I'd write these, long, really good scholarly dissertations in the description box. I'm like, why am I doing this? So I finally had my V8 moment, like, you put these in Substack and just put a link in the description box. So the Substack, so you should be able to find me, I think, pretty quickly. If you go on to YouTube, Odyssey, BitChute with John Titus, you'll track me down pretty fast.
And of course, all of those links will be in the show notes for our conversation. Interview 1929. How appropriate. Anyway, we will, I certainly hope, if you want to, I will definitely like to have you on later on as the series progresses so we can talk about what we learn in the future. But people will be along for the ride, and I'm there for it. I think this is exciting stuff. So, John Titus, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, James Corbett.